Grieving while working at a toxic job. So, we're going to be talking about grief today. So, I just want to say from the outset that this is a very heavy time for us individually and collectively. I know that I'm feeling the weight of so many things going on right now in the world, and just with the disproportionate layoffs for Black women, the loss of Malcolm Jamal Warner, just feeling so much heaviness right now. So, we're going to have a conversation about grief. And you might feel like, oh my God, this is heavy. I don't want to talk about it. But we do need to talk about it because we're feeling the heaviness. And so when we avoid talking about things, it doesn't help us at all. So it's important for us to talk about how we're feeling and having a safe space to talk about how we as Black women are feeling right now. So this is an opportunity for us to talk about what's going on with us as Black women and what is it like to grieve while working at a toxic job. So, if you don't know me already, I'm Dr. Kamani. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I've been licensed for over 20 years now. I'm also a toxic job survivor, but more importantly, I'm a toxic job liberator for Black women. I'm also the co founder with Marissa Price of the Job Liberation Virtual Summit for Black women, which is now available on replay. If you would like to get the replay, that is available in the description section of this video. I'm excited to have my Spelman sister again with us today. So, this is Dr. Nyasha Grayman. She is here with us and she is a specialist talking about grief. So I also talk about grief, but this is her field of expertise. So I wanted to have her to talk about this. And the timing is actually perfect because again, there's so much individual and collective grief going on right now. So Dr. Grayman, can you please introduce yourself?
Thank you. Thank you for having me again, Kamani. And I would say I'm a specialist. I wouldn't call myself an expert. Expert connotes that you've arrived somewhere and I'm always learning. But I am a specialist in grief, specifically acute grief and traumatic grief, and grief from death and other life transitions that we experience. I have a small private practice based in Maryland, licensed also in Virginia, and anticipate licensure coming through for DC this week. So I will be able to serve and support Black women in the entire DMV area, which is part of my goal.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, so I mentioned earlier when we started about just feeling like this collective grief that we're experiencing. And, I talked about the disproportionate layoffs for Black women right now. I talked about the loss of Malcolm Jamal Warner. Can we talk a little bit about collective grief? Like, what is that? I mentioned it, but can we talk a little bit more about what exactly is that and how might this show up for Black women?
Yeah. So I think whether we're talking about collective grief or individual interpersonal grief, the foundation that we need to think about is attachment theory and what we can learn about attachment theory and then what happens when our attachments get separated. So when we're attached to significant others, and they can be significant others that are in our bloodline, that are in our physical proximity, but they can also be individuals that are in the larger collective imagination, such as an actor, a multi-hyphenate talent like Malcolm Jamal Warner, we actually biologically, and I think this will relate to what we end up talking about with Black women grieving while working, we biologically release neurochemicals that make us feel bonded to significant others.
Mm-hmm.
So you may have heard of oxytocin, the love drug. Our brain
Mm-hmm.
actually produces that, and its purpose is to kind of reinforce our bonding to others. And so when we have a loss, when there's a separation of that bond, the reaction is one that looks like what we would call grief. It
Mm-hmm.
involves a searching for the significant other, a sense of disbelief, um, and then a sense of maybe despair when you realize that that bond is actually physically severed
Mm-hmm.
for the rest of your natural life,
Mm-hmm.
and all of the experiences that come with that. And I think, again, we can think about this in terms of being bonded to biological bloodline others or friends, but we can also think about it in terms of being bonded to beloved characters in popular culture and our imagination, and
Mm-hmm.
even our workplaces and our hopes and our dreams for our professional lives and for our families.
That's a really good point. So one thing you said that really stood out to me was like Malcolm Jamal Warner. Like I grew up watching him on the Cosby Show, and so he's a part of my growing up. And
Right.
so when I think about him, I think about my history growing up, and so having that emotional connection to him that character, right, in Cosby Show. And I think a lot of us have that emotional connection to him. So I'm so glad you mentioned that. So you may not know the person, but you feel like you know the person. And
Right.
so it's like that grieving of that person. So that's one thing. But you also mentioned that there could be the grief of a job, right?
Mhm.
So when we think about the grief, it could be death, it could be a relationship, it could be a job. And
Mhm.
so I think sometimes when we think about like a job loss, and even when we think about what's happening now with the Black women, so many Black women losing their jobs, and I'm seeing it so often in LinkedIn. Like I don't know if it's because of my algorithm, I don't know. So
Right.
I'm seeing so many different posts about the disproportionate loss of Black women that it's making me feel this sense of helplessness and hopelessness, right? And so,
Yeah.
as a psychologist, I have to really check myself and self assess because it's really messing with me.
Mhm.
And so, can we talk a little bit about how constantly seeing these messages, which we need to be informed about what's happening, right?
Yeah. Right.
But how these messages can impact us in relation to our coping. We're getting the information about this, how that can impact us and how that can impact our coping.
Oh, absolutely. Like you said, depending on what our algorithms are feeding us, I mean, it
Mhm.
can really kind of engender a sense of despair
Yeah.
and a sense of hopelessness, like you said.
Mhm.
I know for myself, there's a feeling sometimes of being targeted. Like, I mean, we know we're targeted, and
Absolutely.
so it's not actually a feeling, it's kind of a validation of a
Mhm.
notion of what we knew to be true when you
Mhm.
see that. The hope part of it, because I do say I'm in the hope business, even as I specialize in grief and loss,
Mhm.
is that I'm also seeing Black women pivot to open their own businesses, and I
Mhm.
one of the reports that I'm seeing circulating on LinkedIn speaks to how the number of entrepreneurs, and specifically Black female entrepreneurs, is
Mhm.
on the rise, and so,
Okay.
um, that's something that helps me to not sit in the feelings of despair and
Yeah.
hopelessness.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that too, because that's why I wore my shirt today. I rise because,
Mhm.
I have to remember that sometimes we have to be mindful of what we're ingesting, right?
Yes.
So we're looking at things and it's making us feel some kind of way. We
Mhm.
need to evaluate, okay, why am I feeling this way? What's contributing to that? And
Mhm.
then maybe do I need to pull back a little bit? But also, we need to tap into our history to remind us as Black people and as Black women that
Mhm.
we've always found a way. We've
Yeah.
always found a way. So
Mhm.
history has shown us that as Black women, we have found ways to make a way out of a no way. And just
Mhm.
like you're saying now, entrepreneurship or other
Mhm.
ways that we're going to find a way to make a way. And
Mhm.
even thinking about, out of this whole scenario that we're dealing with, the hope is that we will find ways to cultivate post traumatic growth out of this,
Absolutely, yes.
right?
Mhm.
But but in the meanwhile, right? In the
Mhm.
meanwhile, that many of us are really grappling with this collective grief, right? And
Mhm.
so that sense of how do we, as Black women, how do we address this sense of helplessness, hopelessness? How do we
Mhm.
help protect ourselves so
Mhm.
we don't fall into the trap of
Mhm.
the helplessness, hopelessness? Because then that keeps us stuck, right?
Yeah.
So how do we be mindful of not falling into that and getting stuck?
I mean, honestly, on a very concrete level, one of the things I would recommend would be for us to immerse ourselves in counter narratives such as your show. I will tell
Mhm.
you when I
Oh,
was
thank you.
planning, yeah, I mean, this is truthful, and I've assigned some episodes of your shows and some episodes of some of the guests who have come on to your show and have shows of their own to clients who are dealing with stressful
Thank you,
workplaces and
sis.
toxic jobs, right? And so I think we need to do the opposite to
Mm,
crowd out the real estate that the hopelessness and the messages of despair are taking up in our minds. And I do think the
like
best way
that.
to do that is with the counter narratives.
I like that. I like that. I like that. The counter narratives. So let's talk a little bit also. I wanted to touch on something right quick too.
Mhm,
So the issue about direct exposure to grief and then the vicarious exposure to grief, right? So when I hear about so many Black women losing their jobs right now, right? Like, I'm not directly losing my job, but it's a vicarious experience that I'm hearing so many Black women. I'm
Mhm,
also hearing about my Black women clients losing their jobs.
mhm,
So again, I'm not directly, but
mhm,
I'm hearing about their experiences. So can we talk a little bit about direct
mhm.
impact of grief and then vicarious impact of grief?
Mm, yeah, I mean, I think, when we're thinking about supporting each other and we can't heal in isolation, we only heal in community and we need
For
each
sure.
other. I think that if you are in a position where you are right now not being directly impacted, then you are the person who probably has your oxygen mask on first
Mm,
and have a little bit of bandwidth to support those who are. Now, I think
mhm,
if you're finding that your tank or your oxygen level is hitting the halfway point, then you need to defer to someone who's on a full tank of oxygen, right? That we don't want to dip below the
mhm,
halfway point when we're
mhm,
offering support,
mhm,
lest we all end up in trouble like that. And again,
mhm,
back to the notion of attachment and connection, what we know from interpersonal neurobiology is that our nervous systems are regulated in relationship with each other. And
mhm,
so when you're thinking about the stress that someone who's directly impacted is experiencing from grief,
mhm,
the counter to that, similar to the counter narrative, a counter nervous system that is grounded, that is regulated, that is coming from someone that looks like you can be a
mhm,
stabilizing force. It can be a
mhm,
pacemaker, an external pacemaker for the person who's in a more acute state of distress. And so I
mhm,
do think it's really important always, and I think this will probably relate to what we say in terms of Black women grieving and navigating toxic workspaces, but
mhm,
for us to pour into ourselves and practice things that keep us grounded. Because
mhm,
the more fine tuned you are as an
mhm,
instrument of nervous regulation, the more
mhm.
you actually can offer to the sister who is really struggling.
That's a really good point. Now you made me think of another thought, right?
Mhm.
Another question. So, as Black women, I think that many of us are nurturers, right? We give, 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 right? We're supporters. And sometimes we give, give, give from an empty space, right? Like we've
Absolutely.
given so much that we don't even recognize that we're depleted, like we're tapped out.
Yeah.
Okay. So, how can we as Black women become more aware that we're becoming tapped out, right? We
Mm.
might want to support,
Mhm.
right? But we're tapped out. How can
Mhm.
we become more aware
Mhm.
of when we're getting to that halfway point? Like, I'm not really, I can't really give more right now.
Yeah, and honestly, I'll say I don't think there's a shortcut. I think you have to develop your own practice. You have to have a practice. You have to have a holistic wellness practice. Similar to
Mhm,
what I'm thinking about, I remember when I joined my church when I lived in Delaware, we were
mhm,
talking about Bible study and attending Bible study. And they were like, you attend Bible study to train, just like you do if you're a long distance runner or
mhm,
if you're a sprinter. You have to train for the race. You don't
mhm,
wait until it's, go time and then try to figure it out. So you really have to develop your own holistic wellness practice, and that
mhm,
involves something that's going to make you more sensitive to what you're experiencing in your internal system. We call that interoception.
mhm,
That is going to make you just kind of more conscious of when your breathing is more shallow. I mean, I've seen you do episodes on this relating to this. You've done sound healing, you've done the flow yoga. These
mhm.
are all things that facilitate our development of our intelligence of our body on
Right.
the inside. And so there really is no shortcut. You have to
Mhm.
develop your own practice. And you
Good,
do
good,
that with
good.
someone else. You really can't do it again in isolation.
True, 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 true. Okay. So, can we talk a little bit about ways that grief impacts our minds and our bodies?
Yeah. So again, thinking about attachment
Mhm,
when we're separated, that uh, love drug that naturally circulates in our brain is depleted. And the response is a sense of searching and despair. Another thing that we know that happens from the research is that the production of opioid chemical, which would help with kind of like pain deference, that
mhm,
actually drops as well. And so you get a rise in terms of the physical sensations of pain. We can have a number of biological vulnerabilities that arise with grief. We know that we're at a higher risk for cardiac issues. I believe that the
Mm.
research suggests that men in particular are, was it 20 times more likely to suffer a cardiac incident after the loss of a spouse.
20 times?
I believe so. I believe so. I will double check that. Look, I'm like, it's either
Oh.
2 or 20, but I remember being horrified, so I'm thinking
Mm,
20.
mm,
Women not as high, but
mm,
much higher,
mm.
after we've suffered the loss of a significant other, of our spouse in
Wow.
particular. So we know we're at risk for cardiac incidents. We know that we're at risk for increased inflammation in the body. Our
Mm,
immune system is suppressed, and so we're more vulnerable to all kinds of opportunistic infections. Um,
mm.
uh, you think about your cortisol levels are rising and what happens when those levels rise. It's almost like all the agents are rushing to what they see as like the threat center to all the organs. We got to get there. We got to get there. We got to take care of everything. And so again, you can imagine how that can relate to a suppression of our immunity and our natural ability to fight off things that we typically can fight off. And so, we really are actually at high risk for a number of biological deleterious consequences at the
Mm.
beginning of the grief journey, what we would consider the acute journey. So we
Wow.
just, yeah, yeah.
I had no idea. And what about, mental in terms of mind?
Oh, goodness. I mean, so many things. You can imagine that there's a lot of cognitive fog
Mm,
and disorientation. Concentration is impacted.
mhm,
Um, you can imagine how fatiguing the idea of the search, either the search portion of once the loved one is separated, the mind is searching over and over and then going to the despair, and think about that cycling over and over and over again every day. People talk about they wake up in the morning and they're like, oh my goodness, they're gone.
yeah.
They're not here. And that happens again. So just think about the the energy that that
The
takes to be.
constant shock and reset.
Yes, exactly, the cognitive load, and then, I mean, this is, I think, a good segue into what are the implications for that for work. So if
Mm,
you're having that kind of experience every morning, also sleeplessness, sleep disruption is very,
mhm,
very common. You can
mhm.
imagine how that can impact your performance on the job.
Wow, that's deep.
Mhm.
So, is there anything that people can do to mitigate, right? I mean, some things are just natural, right? So, of course, loss of someone, you're going to have some of these. Is there anything that people can do to help mitigate any of these biological or psychological impacts of grief?
Yeah, I think that we do need to think about taking care of our basic needs. I think the last time I was on the show, we talked about this, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And our
Mhm,
most basic needs are physiological. And
mhm,
when we're talking about the physiological consequences, those require a physiological response and intervention. And so you do want to really try to practice sleep hygiene, good sleep hygiene practices, which can relate to a warm bath at night. When we're in a warm bath and then we get out of the bath, actually the heat escapes from our body and that cools us down and that can help us sleep. So it's the escape,
mhm,
kind of the contrast from the warm water to the cooler air.
mhm,
Having a dark room for sleep, trying to go to sleep at the same time every night, but also
mhm,
taking a nap if you need a nap. Um,
mhm.
Making sure that you're staying hydrated, thinking about Chef B's hydration challenge.
Yes.
Having a hydration practice is really important now, and having people in your orbit who will help you to make sure that you're doing those things, or at least try to help you make sure that you're doing those things, because you can't do them all on your
Yeah.
own. You're not going to remember. And so this is where your team of support really becomes important. Someone talked about it in terms of different types of trees in your life. I talk about in terms of
Mhm,
different baskets, that there are people who are there as instrumentalists and they help you with, day-to-day schedules, cleaning, hygiene, activities of daily living. There are people in your orbit who are in the basket of distraction, and they're the ones who really help you kind of take your mind off of things and provide a short-term relief from the grief and a grief break. And then there are people who are really good listeners for you to vent. You can call them any time of night, that 3 a.m. Middle of the night grief visit if you need to. Those people are around and available to talk. But that's also another way in terms of thinking about the cognitive effects is that with all of that, with the sleep disruption, we have what is infamously known as like the 3 a.m. grief visit, where you may notice yourself like, yeah, I woke up at 3:30. It's like, yeah, that is for whatever reason a very vulnerable time and a time where grief comes to visit when we've been busy all through the day.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned Chef B, so I'm going to put Chef B. So Chef B is one of our Spelman sisters as well. So she has a hydration challenge. I'll put that in the description section as well. So I see a comment or a question. What about when one has experienced multiple significant losses, then having to deal with a toxic work environment?
Yeah, so compounded grief is, I mean, it absolutely adds to the challenge of a grief journey. I mean, one thing I would recommend is that we all become very familiar with our leave policies at work as
Mm,
they exist, including think about your personal time off that you can take, bereavement leave policies at your workplace. Unfortunately, most workplaces have woefully inadequate bereavement leave policies. I think maybe 3 days
mhm.
for, and then they specify, we talked about this before, they specify who in your life is worthy of 3 days of
Right.
bereavement leave. The big push with a group option B by one of the a former executive from now Meta is for 20 days leave and 20 days that we can use as needed. So not necessarily 4 weeks of consecutive leave, but if you want to have 1 day a week for 20 weeks, you can do that or spread it out as you need. But compounded grief is really difficult and it is a risk factor for complicated grief. And I do think that complicated grief requires a higher level of intervention than just kind of white knuckling it through.
Can we talk a little bit about how can someone distinguish between regular grief and complicated grief?
Yeah. So with complicated grief, you're thinking, well, first let me start with regular grief. With regular
Okay.
grief, we're all going to deal with that searching, longing, and even despair. That's a natural cycle.
Okay.
Um, and the acute phase of that, people might say, is like 3 months. That doesn't mean you're out of the clear for 3 months. With the typical grief symptoms of a sadness, disrupted sleep, appetite change, the yearning, the despair, anger, all of the emotions.
Mhm.
But we would say that um, after a year, so a year,
Mhm.
within 12 months, completely considered within the normal grief trajectory. So the
Mhm.
folks who are coming to those of us who are bereaved, 2 months later, 3 months later, you're still grieving, you're not over it yet, very premature. Very
Mhm.
premature. What we
Mhm.
see is that after 12 months, people are still going to experience those symptoms of grief. They very
Mhm.
well may be with you for the rest of your life. Grief doesn't really shrink. We tend to think that we grow around grief and we grow a greater capacity to carry it more than grief shrinks. But what we do see is that typically after 12 months, you are going to see a decrease in the frequency and the intensity of the grief experiences and symptoms. In terms of complicated grief or traumatic grief, I mean, there are some people who probably meet the clinical criteria for post-traumatic stress well before 12
Mhm.
months, and those would be individuals who are experiencing symptoms that are known to emerge with traumatic stress, such as flashbacks, such
Mhm.
hypervigilance, a sense of dissociation in
Mhm.
the form of depersonalization and derealization, avoidance of
Mhm.
particular physical spaces. Like, these are all kind of flags that go up for us, when we're working with someone, that this individual may be dealing with traumatic stress
Mhm.
and and has stepped off the path of the quote unquote normal grief course.
So is the treatment different for the different types of grief?
It is, it is. So in terms of quote unquote normal grief, I think
Mhm,
that I would say that uh, you have a much wider scope of support networks that that could really step in and be supportive, from very informal family and friends to
mm,
a death or grief doula to a grief coach.
mm,
Um, to also a counselor and a therapist. So it's like you could always use also a counselor and a therapist, but not
mhm,
necessary. But if you're really dealing with complicated grief, that's where I really think you need to work, or I would recommend that you work with a licensed clinical mental health professional,
mm,
because we have been trained in some tools that relate to traumatic stress intervention, and that may include something in the EMDR family, which stands for
mm,
eye movement desensitization reprocessing, but it's not really necessarily about eye movement, but it's
mhm,
really about working with the traumatic memories
mm.
that are really plaguing those of us who are stuck in a PTSD loop.
Okay, okay. And let's think about for if you've experienced grief and you go to work, and maybe going to work is a distraction for you,
Yeah.
right? So going to work might be a coping strategy for you.
Mhm,
Can we
mhm.
talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Very strangely to me, when I look back at it now, when I experienced my own traumatic loss of my son after 3 weeks, I look back and I realize it was the most productive time of my academic career. I published more articles than any other time in my life. Clearly,
Mhm,
I was using work as coping, and
mhm,
the ability to channel my energy, my mental energy, into something that felt meaningful and
mhm,
productive, but did not really deal with the day-to-day reality of what I was experiencing, was helpful, was a little breather. I was still experiencing traumatic grief. Um,
mhm,
but there is research that shows that having a place to go to work, having viable work, is positive and healthy for coping. It
mhm,
does maybe give you a sense of purpose during a period of time when really are questioning the meaning of life and what is
mhm,
the purpose of it all, especially if you're working, I think, in a capacity that involves serving others, which so many of us do.
mm. So it may have a benefit in terms of giving a sense of purpose, but is
Mhm.
there also a hidden cost
Of
involved with that too?
Oh, of course, of course. Going back to that 3 AM grief visit, grief
Mm.
will be waiting right there for you. It is
Woo!
not going anywhere. So if you think that you're gonna be able to outrun the grief by
Mhm,
working more, you're not. And it can
mm,
prolong some people's grief process because they are
mhm.
avoiding tending to their grief.
Oh, wow. Okay. And what happens when work is no longer you can't use work as a shield for you, as a distraction, and you just trying to muster all the energy to try to use work, but you can't do it. So what happens for Black women in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a very concrete kind of professional level, it
Mhm,
really does put us in a professionally vulnerable space. And when we're talking about working in places and spaces that are toxic, that are not set up for us to survive,
mhm.
it's really it's a challenging time because it can feel a bit like sharks circling the water.
Woo!
It really can, and those who have been through the experience, they know what I'm saying is true, that it's when you are your most vulnerable that the predators really go in,
Wow.
right? So in a time when you are in need of extra care, extra support, extra compassion.
Like stepping on you when you're down.
Absolutely.
Mm,
Absolutely. And so
mhm,
we then, on top of dealing with our grief, are worried about job performance appraisals, right?
mm,
Because this means we're really vulnerable to hypercritical job performance appraisals, um, and other kinds of scenarios that will set us up to exacerbate the grief experience, to exacerbate the brain fog, the cognitive fog, the
mm.
concentration difficulties that someone who senses that weakness or that sensitivity and does not wish you well may seek to exploit it.
That's almost like sociopathy behavior. You know what I'm saying? Like you recognize that somebody's struggling and you really try to capitalize on that.
Absolutely.
Oh my God. Right.
Mhm.
Okay. So, can we talk about more ways that a toxic workplace can exacerbate your grief symptoms that you're having? So, you might feel even more hypervigilant, right? You might feel like even more on guard. You might feel like you're under attack. Let's talk
Mhm.
a little bit more about ways that being in a toxic workplace can possibly exacerbate your grief reactions.
Yeah, I mean, the doubt, think about the doubt that arises, and how, that kind of space will make you second guess your abilities and your sense of worthiness, maybe more, we see a lot of discussion around imposter syndrome. All of that
Mhm.
can be elevated, when you're in a vulnerable state and a toxic workplace.
Mhm.
I'm trying to think of other ask me that question again so that maybe I can think of some
Well,
other.
it's just that, I see even a comment that was made. I was laid off when I was grieving. I couldn't concentrate at work, right? So, on the one hand, I know that we have a job, we have an expectation to do the job, right?
Mhm,
I get that, right?
mhm,
But it just seems that, like, when we're in a toxic job, that camera went off for some reason, but
mhm,
whatever. So sometimes we're in a toxic job, like you said before, like people will see us struggling, right?
mhm,
And then they'll kind of like feed off of it, they'll like fester on
mhm,
it, right? And it's
mhm,
like a bully. It's like
mm,
a bully, right? So a
absolutely.
bully will see you're struggling and they'll see like, oh, there's an opportunity for me to kind of like really kind of gravitate on that, right? So like seeing opportunities where you're not at your best, and they'll throw you under the bus more,
Mhm, mhm,
or they, like you said, they might micromanage, or they might see opportunities where you might make a mistake and they exacerbate that, right?
mhm,
Or they might gossip up, tell your personal business about, what you're going through with your
mhm,
family, with other
mhm,
people, right? So
mhm,
just like that kind of messy kind of
mhm,
stuff to make
mhm.
your work environment intolerable,
Yeah.
just intolerable, right?
Mhm.
So I'm just wondering, are there other things that maybe you've heard about in terms of Black women or Black people in work environments when they're experiencing grief that kind of exacerbates their grief reaction?
I mean, I actually don't know if I can add any more to that particular question.
Yeah,
I think you pretty well cover it, that
yeah,
it can be a time of open season where
yeah,
everything goes to try and get you out or to get you demoted or to,
yeah,
um, malign your reputation. Yeah.
yeah. And that's the situations where, I've encountered people where they're like, how could somebody do that? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Mhm.
how can
Absolutely.
people be that evil?
Absolutely.
And when I get questions like that, I say to people, um, it is what it is. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? Like, we can't try to figure out why people are evil. They
Mhm.
are, right?
Mhm.
Like, we're
Mhm.
looking at the behavior, they are evil. We cannot try to figure it out because
Mhm.
we'll
Mhm.
never figure out why they're evil, but they
Mhm.
are, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I think it's very difficult for people not to go down that path because then they start personalize it, right?
Mhm. Right, 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 and that's where I think our work as supports come in, particularly if you're working with a counselor or a therapist. Yeah,
Mhm.
grief can absolutely be a clarifier of what is going on, and I think, you and I have mentioned this before we started, but, um, a toxic job that you were, quote, unquote, "managing"
Mhm.
now be clarified is absolutely intolerable, and it may be because these people truly do not respect my basic humanity. They think
True
that
that.
mule, they hold me in no regard, and they
Mhm.
really do not care about what
Mhm.
happens to me. And what do you do when you're armed with that kind of clear information?
Mhm.
And when
Mhm.
we're in workspaces and organizational spaces, I say to people, we always have really 3 options. You can try to adjust to the organization, you can
Mhm.
try to change the organization, or you can leave the organization.
Mhm, 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 and I love that you said that we have options, right?
Mhm,
So when we're in situations, it's important for us to recognize we always have options in a situation, and I
mhm,
think too, what's difficult for people sometimes is recognizing that even when you're at your most vulnerable state, like when you're grieving, that even at that most vulnerable state, that people may still be conspiring against you. And that's the part that's so painful for
Yeah.
people. And they get stuck there, right? They get
Mhm,
so stuck because they're already hurting. They're
mhm,
already hurting because of the grief. And then the fact that they're dealing with this toxic work environment where people are conspiring against you, it just feels like, oh my God, like I just
mhm,
can't, right?
mhm,
And I would think in situations like that, we would think about maybe taking a leave of absence or getting some type of distance from
mhm,
that toxic
mhm,
work environment. Would you
mhm.
agree?
Absolutely. I think what we don't wanna do is kind of go 10 toes down and be like, "But I'll show them," and right? Which, I mean, we can do that too, we know,
Yes.
and, I would not recommend that. I would
Yeah.
recommend, that you work with a person who can help you get to the place where you actually find that acceptable, and like you said, where you're not internalizing it, where you're
Mhm.
not personalizing it. This is not a commentary on you, this is a commentary on them and the organization and the soul or lack thereof that
Mhm.
they seem to possess.
Ooh, ooh, what did you say? Repeat that again. What did you say? You said that you said the lack of soul they possess. Say that again. What?
Their souls are cracked, in short.
Woo! Okay, yes, okay,
Mhm,
absolutely, absolutely. So when we were talking before, you talked about a grief-literate workplace.
mhm.
What is that? Can
Yeah.
you explain what that is for Black women?
Yeah. So I do think that it's a workplace that has some basic knowledge of the effects of grief on the brain and the body, like we've, kind of just quickly gone over here. And so there is a context within which they are interpreting and assessing behavior change, right, for the
Hmm,
person. So this would be a workplace that understands that brain fog, that concentration, that confusion,
mhm,
um, that energy has shifted and that's very normal and you should anticipate that. And so a grief literate place that is then also compassionate would have policies in place and practices that would reflect that knowledge. So
mhm,
maybe you offer workplace accommodations. Maybe you allow the person to go to a shorter workday schedule, fewer hours a week, or rotating different times. Again, maybe a time off, and you have a team of people who are figuring out how to pitch in and coordinate and cover certain aspects so that maybe you can go to therapy once a week and tend to your grief.
hmm,
Um, so a grief workplace has that. I think that personally, I don't think our workplaces are family, and I am, as previous guests you've had have said, I am very suspicious of workplaces that use the language of we're like family. We are
oh,
not. We are not. This is at a certain level transactional, and so I don't think that a grief literate workplace tries to act like family. I think that it stays in its lane, and its lane is providing structural support that allows a person to tend to their grief. And so again, that involves workplace accommodations, um, generous bereavement leave, which would be the 20 days, not 3, um, flexible schedule, and offering that without the person then having to take on the task of asking or feeling like, I don't want to ask for a special favor. They're already, again, feeling vulnerable and stress, but a place that has this kind of knowledge of what happens in grief and what is normal in grief and the normal span of an acute state being up to 12 months acts like they have that knowledge. So they're doing better because they know better.
question. How can someone tell if they have a grief-literate workplace?
Oh, that's excellent question. I would say again from a policy standpoint, that's where you're looking at HR
Mm,
and what offerings HR has with respect to bereavement. You're looking at the company or the organization's bereavement leave policy. Do they offer people who are bereaved services such as empathy? Empathy.com has a whole HR kind of like suite of services that they offer to different organizations and companies that talk about support for grief from the emotional and social and psychological to the instrumental, such as if you're having to deal with finalizing people's estates and the paperwork and kind of like all of those administrative tasks that relate to grieving as well, funeral planning, etc. Does the organization offer that? Does it offer the generous leave policy? Those are strong signs. Does it offer a subscription to help text, a 1-year subscription, which costs on an individual basis $99, but help text is also an entity that provides packages for workplaces that a workplace could buy so that when they
What
have
is that service? What does
help
it do?
help text.
What does that do? What does help text do?
Oh, help text, what it does is it sends the person who is bereaved personalized support guidance twice a
Oh,
week. Yes, based on the nature of your loss, your relationship with the person, the
hmm.
the length of time since the loss, like you get to customize it in that way. So the information that's coming to you straight, to your phone is personalized for that. So, if you lost someone due to homicide and you're a homicide survivor, the support is going to be very specific to that, as that can entail some different things than losing someone to quote unquote natural causes. And the other thing with help text is that it allows you to identify two people that you want to receive information on how to support you. So, one of the things that happens when we're bereaved is that those
Mhm,
of us who love the people who are struggling, we want to be there, but we don't know what to do. We don't know what to say.
mhm.
Help text allows the person to identify two people who will receive that information. Like, call your friend and offer to clean their home today.
That's
Or,
great.
yeah,
So is
yeah,
it helptext.com?
I believe so. Yeah.
That's great. I never heard of that before. I'm gonna put that in the chat. That
Yes,
is
and
really
it's
good.
text with, an S on the end. So, yes, helptext.com.
Oh, helptext.com. Okay, so I'm gonna
So,
put that
yes,
in
I
the
would
chat.
love to see more workplaces offer help texts. I mean, it's one of the gifts that I give to my loved ones
That's
who are
great.
bereaved. And it's an offering that I suggest for maybe individuals who really don't feel like they're ready for counseling or they don't want to do counseling, or maybe thinking about someone who wants to do counseling, but for logistic reasons can't do counseling. Maybe they work the overnight shift where most counselors aren't available. I know there are some online that may be available 24 hours, but I would probably recommend help text over those.
That is phenomenal. Thank you so much. Again, I never heard that before. A question just came in. What about physical symptoms of grief?
Oh, absolutely. So, yeah, I think we talked a little bit about that, the physiological symptoms, cardiovascular issues, gastrointestinal issues, um, sleep disturbance, um, hypervigilance, easily startled response, um, changes in appetite, headaches, nausea. So, I mean, when I'm working with someone, a lot of the clients that I work with do present with a lot of physical symptoms. And one of the first things that we do is actually coordinate with the primary care physician to get a full workup because you do want to rule out um, some kind of some medical issues that may be going on there. But the full gamut of physical maladies can emerge with grief.
Okay. And what about, we talked about taking a leave. Can you talk a little bit about why or what are some of the benefits of taking a leave if you're able to, if you're in a toxic work environment and you recognize that they're kind of, as you said, the sharks are circling you, right? You're grieving, the
Mhm.
sharks are circling you. What are some of the benefits of taking a leave while you're grieving?
Oh my goodness. Well, if you can take a leave while you're grieving, you absolutely get to reclaim those resources that you've been expending, that are working overtime to kind of produce while you're in the workplace, while you're also grieving, and you can concentrate on that. Grief can be really exhausting and you really need a lot of rest. And so if you can take a leave, that will provide an opportunity where you can actually get that physical rest, which, like we said, then maps onto so many of the physical maladies that can emerge. Um, it gives you time to work with a counselor or a therapist in an intensive way if you want. One of the things that I offer with my practice is an intensive for those who are experiencing traumatic grief. And so that involves working together, every day for a week, and then 4 days a week, then 3 days, and we what we call titrate down to once a week therapy. So if you're someone who has a month off, and can take a month off bereavement, you could do that intensive kind of work, and that would be difficult if you're needing to go to work. And so you may experience some alleviation of those symptoms sooner if you can have that kind of concentrated time. But there's definitely no cure for grief. So there's the idea that, oh, I could take off a month or 2 months and I'm going to knock this out and then I'm going to go back to work and be back to self. That's not happening. You're not going back to yourself.
Yeah. And I love that you're talking about resources that you offer as well. And before we end, I'm going to have you talk about more resources that you offer and services and all that, right? So when we think about, taking a temporary break, that's wonderful if you're able to do that.
Mhm,
And the resources I offer are to help Black women really prepare to exit out of toxic work environments, right?
mhm,
But their preparation for that. So
mhm,
let's say a Black woman is in a toxic job and she's not able to take a leave.
mhm,
She's not able to prepare to exit out the
mhm,
toxic job.
mhm.
What are some things that she can do to help herself if she's not able to do those things? She's not
Yeah.
able to exit.
Yeah. So even I think if your grief experience makes things very clear that you need to leave the job,
Mhm.
we do recommend no big changes within the first 12 months that,
Mhm.
if at all possible. Sometimes that's not possible and you really do need to make a quick pivot.
Mhm.
But if at all possible, the recommendation is no big changes within
Mhm.
the first 12 months. And
Mhm.
so thinking about what does it mean to exit this place, having that 12 months and coming up with a plan, like I said, utilizing a lot of the services and support source resources that you offer. But what you can do in the meantime is, I would say, try to maintain as regular of a schedule with your workplace as you can, and say no to more. No is a complete sentence. We say that all the time. So this is absolutely not the time to take on extra work. It is okay to step back and say, I've really been through a lot, and it's okay for you to bring your humanity into work. Even if you know the sharks are circling and you know that their souls are cracked, that doesn't mean that you need to diminish your own humanity in work. It is okay to constantly remind the people at work that you are a human being, you are not a mule, and that you actually have been through a significant loss, because people will forget. And if you act like you're over it, they will for sure run with that. So I think reminding people that you have been through significant loss and you think that taking on that additional project this year is not a good idea, maybe next year, or not this season, maybe next season is a good idea. When you're in your workplace, if it's a space where you can actually step outside, I'm always going to recommend some daily time in nature, in the natural environment, exposed to some vitamin D, listen to the birds sing, see something green. And if you can't get outside, look at something green on your smart device, your computer. That actually does have a benefit, research shows. So even if you can't yourself physically get outside, but physically getting outside would be recommended. And like I said, I would say scaling down the responsibilities that you're taking on work are probably the two most important things. Or three, constantly reminding people of your humanity,
Mhm.
scaling back on taking on extra tasks,
Mhm.
and taking breaks throughout the workday.
That's great. Now, what about these coworkers or supervisors who ask intrusive, insensitive questions?
Mhm.
In relation to your grief issues, how would you suggest that those intrusive, insensitive questions are addressed?
Mm. Yeah, I have different ideas. Well, I mean, one thing that I do give clients, others, and this is available online, and you can find one of these anywhere if you do a Google search for it. But a piece on grief etiquette. You can either find a podcast or a blog post about grief etiquette and simply give it to them. Part of the reducing the additional responsibilities that you take on at work also means, while it's okay, I think, and I recommend reminding people of your humanity, you're not there to be a grief educator. And I think less is more in this sense. So if you can actually just hand someone a piece of paper that is like, here's a summary of grief etiquette, or here's a podcast on grief etiquette you might want to listen to. I think this would be great. Um, I mean, you can also be firm and say, I don't want to talk about this, or this feels intrusive. There's nothing wrong with being direct. I think that if people feel comfortable being intrusive, you should feel comfortable, setting your boundaries and being direct and kind.
That's good. That's good. Okay. Now, as we're winding down, can you, because I love that
Mhm.
helptext.com resource, right?
Mhm.
Are there other resources that you could maybe share with the audience that might be helpful, particularly like free resources that might be helpful for people?
Yeah. So, let me think. One resource that is free that I do also use in my clinical work is on YouTube, Yogi Nico. She offers fantastic, gentle stretches, gentle yoga stretches. I know a lot of times people do recommend yoga for grief, and you can find like a, certified grief yoga, et cetera, et cetera. My personal experience is that many of those practices are too intense,
Mm-hmm.
and they require just too much energetic resource than the person may have at the time. And
Mm-hmm.
I find that Yogi Nico, who is a sister, has really nice collection of very gentle stretches, and she's really good at talking you through them. And so, like I
Is it
said,
NIKO or NICO?
NICO,
NIC. I never heard of her. Okay, thank you. Yogi
fantastic.
Nico.
Mhm,
Okay, I'll put on
mhm.
the screen too.
Yeah.
Very good.
And the thing that I like is, like, with her, I really focus on the stretches that keep you on the floor, that don't
Mhm.
involve too much up and down movement, that again are really gentle, really nurturing, because this is a time for softness and not a time for pushing your body to see what it can do and how you can contort it.
That's awesome. Okay,
Mhm.
okay,
So
okay.
there's Yogi Nico,
Mhm.
another, online source that's free, and I will use her episodes as homework all the time, is Dr. Tama's Homecoming
Uh-huh.
podcast is really great, and she has a number of episodes that relate to grief and also, healing in toxic workplaces and stressors of our lives. So those are 2, and then, like I said, not free, but I would also recommend the help text. And then there's actually, a workbook that I would recommend, not free, but, $26. This
Mhm.
one is, let me look it up really quickly. Uh, Hold on.
These are very helpful, and I'll put these everybody. I'll put these in the YouTube description section as well. Okay, so they're on the screen, but I'll also put it in the YouTube description section so you can go back and check out these resources. And
Oh,
Dr. Tima's podcast is outstanding, so check that out. Yeah, very good.
yeah. So the other resource, like I said, not free, but it's about $26.
Mhm.
It's a workbook called A New Path, a practical workbook and planner for the first year of grief
A
and
practical
settling.
workbook for what?
A practical workbook and
Mhm.
planner
Mhm.
for the first year of grief
Mhm.
and settling your person's affairs.
Excellent. Okay, so I'll put that on the screen as well.
And then one more text I would recommend is
Okay.
Alan Wolfelt's Grief One Day at a Time.
Okay.
Mhm.
Grieve. That's a book.
That's a book, and
Grieve
it has
one day at a
daily
time.
entries. Mhm.
Okay. Okay. So I'll put that in the chat and also the description section as well. Okay. Excellent. 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 Okay. So as I'm about to go through the community chat, can you share about services that you offer and how you can be contacted, please?
Sure. So you can contact me at Wisdom Counseling Baltimore. If you do a Google search for Wisdom Counseling Baltimore, I'll come up. I am Baltimore Metro physically based, but again, licensed in Maryland, licensed in Virginia, and should be licensed in DC this week. And I offer intensives for those who are experiencing acute and traumatic stress. And again, this is stress and trauma related to grief from death, but also from life transitions that are non death related. And I see clients weekly, I see clients bi-weekly, and then clients eventually sometimes quote unquote graduate to monthly. But I would say I typically start out working with clients weekly for sessions, and I provide in person walk and talk, nature based therapy
Okay.
in the area, right? So if you're in Virginia, that would go as far as Northern Virginia. And then I also provide online services for Black women in those areas. And my practice focuses on and specializes in Black women's grief and stress.
Beautiful. Now give me your website again.
The website is Wisdom Counseling hyphen Baltimore LLC.com.
Okay. So I will also put this in the description section of this video as well, and I'll put it on the screen so you guys can check out my sis and get some additional support. Now, as we are again about to read the community chat, any last words of wisdom that you want to offer to Black women watching this right now who might be grieving, who's in a toxic job right now?
Yeah. Well, first, I mean, I guess encouragement. I'm glad you're here because you do have some education. And I think one of the things that you're grieving while working in a toxic job is that idea again that you're being made to feel like you're inadequate or you're not performing up to snuff. And just having a space here where you know that that's not true
Mhm.
can be really helpful. Um, and to know that you have many resources available to you that are now available to you that weren't available when I was experiencing my traumatic loss and traumatic loss journey um, for you to take advantage of.
Yeah, yeah, that there are resources. And I love that you said that because I think that now as Black women, as we're becoming more open about our experiences,
Hmm.
that we're sharing our experiences so we know we're not alone in
Hmm.
what we're going through. We have a sense of validation, we have a sense of community. As you said
Hmm.
before, we heal in community. I love that quote. But
Hmm.
also that we know that we have resources and we have options, which is so
Hmm.
important because especially during this time, as I started off mentioning before, that with so much going on in the world right now and so much bad news that we're just bombarded with all the time, it's hard not to feel that sense of helplessness and hopelessness. But when you're able to hear other Black women talk about, hey, I get it, yet there's another way, right? That you feel like, oh, okay, it's not as bad as I thought it was, or there might be another opportunity for me. I think that that is very healing for us as Black women. And
Hmm.
so I'm really glad we're able to have this conversation. So, community chat, I'm glad we're giving space to grieving a job. Many don't understand this. I agree. I agree. But it's hard to always have to be resilient, especially when you are in the abyss of grief. I agree. Right. So when we think about as Black women, as we go into the workplace, that often as Black women, we're masking, right? So we go in, we're masking, we're acting like everything's okay, we're highly competent and qualified and all these things. But many times we're struggling, we're dying inside. And then you add on, if we're grieving, it makes it even harder. So I agree. And so, really thinking about where the spaces where can we take the mask off,
Hmm.
therapy or our close friends or family, we can take
Hmm.
the mask off and we can allow ourselves to grieve. I like that we can't heal in isolation. We heal in community. Yes. We are absolutely being targeted. Yes. So true. I found companies have a sadistic pleasure of frustrating aspirations and mobbing and eliminating Black competent workers who mind their business and do their work. Yeah.
Hmm.
If I could string together all the high roads I've taken,
Mm.
I would be just shy of the edge of the universe.
Mm.
Woo! Wow.
Mm,
Now that is poetic, okay?
mhm,
When
mhm,
will the focus be on these who cause the disease? Okay, let me just say this. Um, I think that there needs to be a focus on them somewhere, right? But my energy is not on them, okay? My energy is on us and what we need to do to heal, okay? So if other people want to have conversations about those people, I encourage them to do that, right? But
mhm,
this space is for us, okay?
mhm,
But yes, there needs to be conversation about them too. Yes.
mhm,
What about when one has experienced, oh, we talked about that, multiple traumas or multiple grief experiences. Thank you. While dealing with grief, my employer decided to input a course that I would not be able to attend due to wrapping up loose ends.
mm,
Had asked about earlier in the year. It was sadistic. I'm so sorry. That's
mhm.
terrible.
Yeah.
Greetings, sisters. Peace, love, joy, embrace joy. Hey, sis. Go one of our
Mhm.
channel members here today. Grief
Yeah.
never goes away. You just become stronger with dealing with the pain as time goes on. So
Mhm,
true. So true.
mhm,
Can we talk a little bit about that? Just a little
mhm,
bit more about that, right? Because, we talk about grief, right? And we talk about the impact of grief, right?
mhm,
So I've lost people in my life and I still think about them. I still have moments of sadness, but
mhm,
it's not the same level of impact,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
So I
mhm,
talk about, when people are grieving. Now, if I am still devastated 20 years down the line, then that's
mhm,
a problem, right?
mhm,
But
mhm.
still having that sadness, that's a normal reaction,
Absolutely. Yeah.
right? To
Mhm,
have that sadness. Yeah.
mhm,
Okay.
mhm,
Thank you for the explanation and clarification of regular and complicated grief. I've experienced in multiple companies I've worked that they would use family crisis death as a reason not to offer you a promotion despite having a stellar employee record. Now that's a true toxic environment, okay?
mhm,
And
mhm,
we read this comment before. I was laid off when I was grieving. I couldn't concentrate at work. That's horrible. I'm sorry to hear that.
mhm,
Shark sparkling in the water. Wow, I felt that. Yes, I did too. In my experience, nonprofits have shown less compassion while being a person-centered
mm,
organization because they don't want
mm,
to carry your workload. I've heard
mm.
a lot about nonprofits.
Wow.
Yes.
Mhm.
Naps are always a great thing. That's true. I took a nap today.
So
Yes.
did I. Mhm,
Okay. Yes, they're a beautiful thing. Yes,
mhm,
I have one who always shows up when I'm struggling to help, seeing everyone, of course. But when I ask one on one, she's
mm,
never available and subtle digs about my competence.
mhm,
That's like the nice nasty, okay?
mhm.
Our brother died and they gave me bereavement, but wrote me up. And I was already dealing with the workplace toxicity and I nearly had a nervous
Oh
breakdown.
my
Oh, I'm
gosh,
so
I'm so sorry to
sorry.
hear that.
That is absolutely horrific.
Mm.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, me
I
too.
expect you to do work at the same level while
Yeah.
grieving. Yes. Oh, just a question. Are there any legal options?
I would say there are, I wouldn't know what they are though.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're being denied, benefits that are supposedly available, then obviously there are legal options there, recourse. I would probably defer to the anti-HR HR lady.
Yes, defer
Mhm,
to her and also maybe consult an employment attorney as well. Yes. And if you confront them, they flip it and say you're ungrateful for the time off. Ah, yuck. Even though you know what they are doing with the posting of jobs, of course, it's conveniently have available while absent. Oh, that's disgusting. Hey,
mhm,
Marissa, good to see you. Is
mhm.
there ever truly any escape from evil people in work life? No, though. I would say no.
I say
That's
yes.
well, the escape is leaving them,
Yes,
right?
right.
And
Oh,
we
oh,
have
you're
to
saying but staying there, right, yeah, no, right.
yeah, but
Mhm.
staying there with the evil people, no,
No.
right? I say like when you see evil,
Mhm.
recognize the evil for what it is, and
Believe it.
don't lie and delude yourself that
That's right.
it's not that bad,
Mhm,
or at least I know this devil and I know how to work with this devil.
mhm,
Mm-mm,
mhm,
no, okay.
mhm,
You
mhm.
escape that evil by going someplace else, right?
Yeah.
But you plan to get out, okay?
Yes. Mhm,
We spoke about three options. What about legal options? Are there any? Again, that goes back to the anti-HR lady and also
mhm,
maybe consulting with a labor attorney.
mhm,
Ironically, when you place boundaries in toxic spaces, they claim you as a problem.
mhm.
That's so true. That's what I talk
Mhm,
about in a lot of my videos. Yes, yes,
mhm,
yes.
mhm.
Okay, let's see. We talked about the
But
resources.
actually, and even Dr. Kamani, can I go back to the 3 options? I would
Yeah.
say, depending on your approach to taking legal option, that is still within one of the 3 options. Either you're looking to change the organization with your legal action, or you're looking to be compensated by the organization as you leave it or after you leave it with your legal action. But that's still within the 3 of you're either trying to adjust to the system, change the system, or leave the system.
Okay. Okay. Most jobs don't have benefits. If you take leave, it's with no pay and job is not secure. Yeah, that's
Mhm,
something to think about and consider. That's
mhm,
when they weaponize guilt. Look how we support you, fake
mhm,
crap. Then
mhm.
flip it and say you're not a team player. That's the mind F, okay?
Mhm, mhm,
Oh, wow, that's brilliant. I'll have to find that. Okay, so we talked about the different resources. It is harder for Black people working in blue collar jobs, customer service jobs, retail, personal support, respite, worker jobs. I agree,
mhm,
especially if not unionized without benefits.
mhm,
Agreed.
mhm,
Agreed. Do we
mhm.
want to say anything more about that?
Just that that's true. I mean, that's a reality of the structure. So
Mhm.
that's a situation where if you're needing to stay in the job, then somehow you have to figure out how to adjust to the culture. And then so maybe those things that we talk about, like having help text, which can send you support that you're receiving while you're on the job. You can't leave to go to a therapy session, but you can
Mhm.
receive that kind of support while you're on your job. Or if you can step away from your job for a moment. But it's true that this is all within the parameters and restrictions of the organization and what exists structurally.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that it's important for us because I just want to make sure that, when I talk on this channel, when I provide guests on this channel, when anything that we do on this channel, that this really applies to all Black women. It doesn't
Right.
really relate to one particular profession or
Mhm,
degree or anything like that, right?
mhm,
This relates to all Black women. It might look a little different, right?
mhm,
But
mhm,
basically, what we're saying is that when we're in these environments, for us to think about what are our different options. The options
mhm,
might look different,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
But for us to consider what are all of our options and then to
mhm.
start preparing for whatever those options are. Okay.
Yeah, and I would say with that, the options might look different in terms of maybe I would consider like dosing of it. So, we talked about all these different options. You have the leave if you can, you have therapy, you have friend support, you have family support, you have help text, you have grief one day at a time, you have all these different things. And then maybe depending on the restrictions or the limitations of your particular circumstance, you may need to, or I might recommend doubling, tripling down on these particular resources
Mhm.
because you're not going to realistically be able to access these. So maybe we really want to sit down and map out a really robust kind of informal support network who can be there for you and really double down on the self-help or kind of like artificial intelligence help that can support you. So still thinking about kind of the buffet of resources, but we
Mhm.
may take more of some and less of others depending on your particular circumstance.
I appreciate that. Okay. And I see in the chat we're offering support to the sis who had a very negative experience in the workplace. And again, that's why I love our community chat because we support one another, we pour into one another. And then another comment. This was a session I didn't know I needed. Oh, that was beautiful.
I'm glad
You
to
all
hear
made
that.
me. You all made things so clear for me. I'm not crazy. Thank you. See, that's the part too. You're
Mhm.
not crazy. And so
Absolutely.
many times these things happen in the workplace that are
Mhm.
crazy making, right?
Mhm.
And we think
Absolutely.
that there's something wrong with us. It is crazy making.
That's
Okay.
right.
So I'm
Absolutely.
so glad that you were able to come and watch this video and
Mhm.
get the validation that no, you're not
Mhm.
crazy. You're not
Nope.
crazy.
Mhm.
Experiencing this too, they exploit you to uphold their fake mask of empathy and competence. Yes.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Mhm.
This is very informative. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, so we talked about the legal options before. Thank you. Returning to work tomorrow after vacation. I'm dreading it. I
Mm.
interviewed while on vacation. I had to stop saying it'll get better. They're truly evil. not just mean wish me luck for a callback. I do wish you luck, sis.
Yes.
And I want you to be encouraged
Mhm.
to not only with this interview, like I hope that this interview works out, right? This job interview that you want worked on, right? And
Mhm.
even if it doesn't, okay,
Mhm.
keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, right?
Mhm.
Because we have to recognize that we will rise, right? Like my shirt says, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
We will rise, just like our ancestors. We will rise. We have to keep
Mhm.
moving forward, okay?
Mhm.
One
Mhm.
toxic job is not going to take us out, even
Mhm.
though they tried to.
Mhm.
They're not going to take us out, but we have to
Mhm.
keep persevering. My
Mhm.
hope is this, is that you're doing things that you're able to do to help yourself in the meanwhile to
Mhm.
discharge that toxicity out of your body.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
So day to
Mhm.
day, what are you doing
Mhm.
every day to
Mhm.
discharge the toxicity out of your body? Because
Mhm.
it takes a toll.
Mhm.
Okay. So if
Mhm.
you don't do something every day, it starts accumulating in your body. Okay.
Mhm.
So that might be like Dr. Nyasha said, it might be looking, going outside, taking a walk. It might be smelling a flower. It might be moving your body. It might something. You need to get that
Mhm.
toxicity out of your body, okay? But
Mhm.
continue to move forward on what your options are,
Mhm.
okay? And I
Mhm.
see another comment that was supportive. Yes, you got this. The heaviest lifting is before the first interview. Yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
Wishing you luck and
Mhm.
sending positive vibes. Yes. So
Mhm.
the community is supporting you too. I'm supporting you. That Nyasha
Mhm.
is supporting you. This
Mhm.
community is supporting you. So know that you will continue to move forward. I know that feeling of dreading to go back to a job, and use that energy that you have right now to fuel you to keep going forward,
Mhm.
right? Know
Mhm.
that it's a temporary situation. It's short term.
Mhm.
It's short term,
Mhm.
okay? And
Mhm.
you'll be able to reflect back on this and be like, oh, there was a time I used to hate that
Mhm.
job, right?
Mhm.
And now I've moved past it. This will be
Mhm.
something in the past. This will be something in the past, okay?
Mhm.
So, and it's a cute dog. They like your dog, girl.
Yeah,
Okay.
Eli doesn't care. He said, "Interview what?"
Yeah. She's like, what about me?
Right.
So any last words you want to share with our community before we wind down?
Oh man, I thank you so much for this channel. I'm so glad that everyone came out tonight to participate in this, and I'm grateful for the people who will see this in the future. And again so grateful for the work that you do, because Dr. Kamani's channel and the channels of some of the guests that she has on, I really use them to speak life over myself when I was transitioning out of a toxic job and going into full-time private practice, leaving, look at, get the little booty out of here. Leaving 20 years of life as an academic. Um, and so, you know, the more that we can put in the counter narratives in our mind to crowd out the negative and give the 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 pieces that speak life into us more real estate in our mind. I think the more that over time you'll notice, even you're carving out space to daydream and dream ways out of
Yes.
bad situations and into post-traumatic stress. I mean, post-traumatic growth, not post-traumatic
Post-traumatic growth,
stress.
post-traumatic growth, right?
Mhm,
We and last week was on post-traumatic. Last week was on post-traumatic slave syndrome, right? And
mhm,
so when we think about these jobs, many of us are experiencing post-traumatic slave syndrome at these jobs. And
mhm,
I want us to remember that post-traumatic growth is possible.
mhm,
We have to be intentional about centering our wellness and doing something
mhm,
every day to center our wellness, right? If it's a nap, like I said, I took a nap today. I was in my garden today. I did some
mhm,
things today because I was feeling low, I felt a little
mhm,
low today.
mhm,
So I did some things to help replenish myself. So my hope is, because Dr. Nyasha said this, she said that we need to be aware of how we're feeling,
mhm,
because you cannot keep giving to people if you're feeling low. Okay. So
mhm,
I was like feeling low. I was like, I need to go to my
mhm,
garden. I need to take a
mhm,
nap. Okay. So
mhm,
my hope is that when you recognize you're feeling low, what
mhm.
are you doing to replenish yourself? And you have to be intentional about that. Okay. You have to be intentional about that. So everybody, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you. Please give this video a thumbs up. Please share this video with at least two other Black women. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please do so. And oh, my sister's channel.
I know.
What happened?
Eli, this naughty dog.
She wants to do the show, girl. She was like, "What you doing? What you doing? I want to be in the show. What's going on? What's going on?" Okay.
I am so sorry for that, but Eli said, "That's it."
Yes. And I want to say again a special thank you to my Spelman sister, Dr. Nyasha Grayman. Thank you so much.
Thank you
And
so
they
much
said,
for
they said, "Come
having
on,
me.
Eli. Come on, Eli." Eli was going to make Eli was going to get that moment in the sun. Okay,
Yep.
go get that shine. Go get that shine. Okay. So again, everyone, thank you so much. And again, I'm so appreciative to my Spelman sister, Dr. Nyasha, and everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. And any last words, Dr. Nyasha?
Just thank you again for having me. Look at him. He's coming back for more. He turned off the lights. He turned off the camera. My goodness. And thank you. Just thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And again, I love your community. I love your work. It
Thank you.
has been a source of support for me. And this is how we do it. Again, we don't do it in isolation. We support each other. So when I was
Absolutely.
low, I lean on, resources like this to help fill me up. I'm filled up. You lean on me. And that's how we do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Okay, everyone. So I will see you later. Okay. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.